Welcome to our first reading session, scholars. So, are we ready for the first book? This is one of my faves. Well, they're all my faves, just like you're all my faves. So this book is called Hewitt Anderson's, and I don't know if you can see in there, Great Big Life. Now I wonder, which one of these three people is Hewitt Anderson? Is it him? Is it her? I think it's this one right here. Well, let's get started and see what happens in this great big life. These are some awesome pictures. See, let me show you. Oh my goodness. Look at these pictures. Look at. All right. Hewitt Anderson lived with his parents in an enormous house at the edge of town. So, they said this house is really big. I can't tell yet, but I think we're going to figure this out. His parents believed big things were the best. They boasted a grand and impressive residence overlooking the valley below. This is the house. That's the valley below. Their house was marvelous for giving parties. The Andersons gave bountiful banquets, elegant teas, and glorious garden parties that sometimes lasted for days. I've never been to a party that lasted for days. Have you? Oh my goodness, you party animals out there. And Hewitt celebrated many birthdays there with his loving family. See? That's the house, the great big house, and the valley. Let's see what happens next. You know what though? Before I move on, I'm going to take off this thing. It's called a book jacket, and it protects the book. But the more I turn, I think the more I'm bending it, and I don't want to bend it because look, the same picture. Did you see that? Oh my gosh, the same picture. This makes me happy, so I won't bend up the book jacket. Let's see. Hewitt Anderson lived happily and contentedly with his mother and father in the vast marvels of their home. A perfect house for giants. Oh, did you know there were giants? But alas, poor Hewitt was not. So his parents, as you see, super big, huge, and little tiny Hewitt down here. While his parents, he was very small. While his parents loved him dearly, his size was a source of great worry and concern for the J. Carver Worthington Andersons. How could a normal-sized boy be born to a family of giants? So he's not really, really small. Like, they're just really, really big. So he's a normal size, like you guys. Like you all. So sorry. Never in the entire generations of the J. Carver Worthington Anderson or C. Mabel Luther Butters clans had anything like this ever occurred. Small, pint-sized, and miniature have never been a part of their vocabularies or their lives. After all, they believed big things were best. In fact, all the Andersons and Butters, relations and friends of their relations, were giants. Ever since their great-great-great-grandmother Ida came to the valley after the business with the beanstalk. I don't know if you guys have heard of Jack and the Beanstalk, but that's where that comes from. The family had been known as people of great stature and girth. Stature's height. Hewitt had made many friends too, giants galore, but nothing could change the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Anderson's own beloved son, Hewitt, was so very small, teeny-weeny in fact. It was something Hewitt's parents had to live with and accept, for they loved their sweet little bundle of joy. But oh, how they worried about his size. So see, all of these people were giants, all of them. So they never had a regular sized child or person in their family. And Hewitt was hopelessly in love with them too, of course. He loved the awe and wonder of them, the deep baritones of his father's voice, and the resounding, resplendent melodies of his mother. When his father chose to sing great operatic versions of nursery rhymes, his mother would join in, creating wonderful duets and harmonies that made Hewitt's liver quiver and tickled his funny bone right down to his shoes. He laughed endlessly after being serenaded for hours. I'm wondering if you guys can see Hewitt without me pointing him out. Let's see. Let's do a little picture walk. Is he here? Oh, look at that. He is on the tippy top of his dad's knee. It's so hard to see him. Oh my goodness. I can't wait till you see this picture. You think you're ready? Look. Look at how small he looks. That's his dad's hand. Again, again, Papa and Mama, sing again, sing again. Hewitt squealed. Over. Of course, they never disappointed their extraordinary son and gave him more and more and more. Hewitt, so comforted while listening to the melodies, found it a perfect way to fall asleep, nestled in the deep well of his father's massive hand. Massive. That's such a good word. It means big. Really big. Hewitt loved riding around inside his father's shirt pocket or sightseeing from the perch of his mother's brimmed bonnet. It was impossible for the three of them to hold hands while out for their morning or afternoon walks, as did many families in their neighborhood. So while his parents held hands, Hewitt sat in the folds of their entwined fingers, which made a nice hammock for him. He was gently lulled to sleep with the rhythm and motion of their walking. All the while, his parents secretly hoped that Hewitt was getting the rest and nutrition he needed to grow. But Hewitt was now 5, and he wasn't much bigger than when he was born. You see him on top of his mother's head? Oh, amazingly, it took a great deal of planning and preparation for Hewitt's parents to care for the mouse-likeness of their child. At times, it was trying to find a needle in a haystack. Whenever Hewitt's parents swept the floor, though they always kept an eye out for him once or twice, Hewitt managed to avoid the broom just in time. So they almost swept him up. That's wild. Because Hewitt was so small, he was able to hunker down between the floorboards, holding on until he was out of harm's way. There were some things, however, that would require more attention and consideration. Things in the way of furnishings, for example. So you see him? You see how small he is compared to his mother's foot and that big old broom right there? Oh, Hewitt. Hewitt had inherited the very bed that his father slept in as a boy. It was a fine-sized bed for a growing giant. But it was entirely too large for Hewitt. Just the same, he loved the bed. He never had to make it because he never mussed his blankets or rumpled his sheets. The feather mattress and pillow were fun for plopping down upon. The tassels on the bedpost were just right for climbing. When Hewitt got lost in his blankets, he pretended he was on a mining expedition. To Hewitt, the world was big and wonderful and wide. He's just sitting on top of the pillow. Look at him. That bed is humongous. Another word for big. His parents tried not to be too concerned about Hewitt's safety and well-being, but the summer Hewitt turned 7, he suffered a rather close call. While preparing the 7-layer cake for Hewitt's birthday party, his mother, in her haste to create a fitting masterpiece, misplaced poor Hewitt. As Hewitt was trapped for an hour in a vat of flour, his parents began their relentless and public worry for their child they loved more than life itself. Finally, Hewitt climbed out of the measuring cup. Hewitt told his parents repeatedly that he could take care of himself. Oh, but worry they did. They worried so much. Look at him. He's in the flour. He was lost in the flour. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Doctors. You see that? That's a big face compared to little tiny Hewitt over here. Doctors were called in. Specialists from around the world made frequent visits to the Anderson home, but no one could explain the circumstances surrounding Hewitt's small and unimposing stature. Dr. Gargantuan, I'm laughing because that's another word for big, a brilliant scientist and family friend, tried to calm their growing worries. He will grow. He is just a bit late to bloom, he reassured them. Or, he said, perhaps this is the opposite of growth spurt. Finally, his suggestion, I could make Hewitt my life's work. Think of the fame, the celebrity for your family. But his parents would not hear such a thing. They adored their puny, frail, delicate bundle of joy. Believing big was best, they took it upon themselves to set things right, to see to it that Hewitt had a big life with big things in it. Oh my gosh. You see Dr. Gargantuan? The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson awoke in the best of spirits. Today would be the survival lesson 1, swimming. But in Mrs. Anderson's hurry to cheer her family on, she tripped and fell. Her tumble caused Mr. Anderson to miss an opportunity for a perfect 10 double somersault pike. The two of them created quite a splash in the pond, a near tidal wave in fact. And little Hewitt was already quite fond of water, was washed clear to the other side of the estate in the garden maze. Oh my gosh. So see, they fell over here and he was just washed away on this side. Quickly, they rushed to him, but because Hewitt was small, he had already found his way out through a shortcut under the boxwood wall. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, on the other hand, wandered aimlessly for a good part of the morning before Hewitt coached them to an exit. In the end, all was served well, as Hewitt showed his talents in the art of solving giant puzzles. So his parents were making sure that Hewitt could survive, but guess what? In the end, he had to help them out of the garden maze. Look at him being all smart. For survival lesson 2, Mr. Anderson would show Hewitt how to climb a beanstalk. In the event he would have to flee the path of an escaped rhinoceros from the nearby zoo, Mr. Anderson felt a surge of his youth again, climbing to the top of a giant Kentucky Wonder beanstalk with Hewitt tucked safely in his shirt pocket. But reaching the top paralyzed Mr. Anderson with great fear. Hewitt, being used to such heights, was not afraid at all. Instantly, Hewitt went into action, just as a leaf from the mammoth, another word for big, beanstalk began to fall. Hewitt held onto the leaf's edge. He was able to float down on the breath of a helpful breeze. Upon landing, he roused the emergency fire and rescue squad, who arrived minutes later with hooks and ladders and a safety net. Mr. Anderson was shaken by the experience, but was more in awe of his perfectly resourceful son. So, what happened to Mr. Anderson? They said he got paralyzed by fear. He was afraid of heights, but Hewitt wasn't, because he's always up high. When it became clear that the lessons in survival training were not accomplishing their goals, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson decided to prepare for their dinner guest, Dr. Gargantuan. I just want you to know, it's okay. We misread something, we can read it over again correctly, right? We can go back and correct our mistakes in reading. Eager to discuss his plans for Hewitt, Dr. Gargantuan arrived before the dinner hour. He tried in earnest to convince Mr. and Mrs. Anderson that a life of scientific promise awaited Hewitt. He said that purpose could be made of Hewitt's small life. After all, the Andersons listened politely, but would hear nothing of it. And so, to lighten the mood, they invited the doctor to view the family's golden egg collection. Inherited from great-great-grandmother Ida, their collection of golden eggs could not be duplicated. Golden peacock eggs, golden goose eggs, and of course, ostrich and emu eggs, all of solid, pure gold. Let's see if we can see those eggs. So I see an egg back here. I see an egg right here. And some over here. Look at all those eggs. Golden eggs. I wonder what's going to happen. A family of big hearts and generous natures, the Andersons knew this trusted family friend had only the best of intentions for Hewitt. They thought it was only fitting to share something of value with Dr. Gargantuan, just not their beloved son. In a moment of inspiration, Mrs. Anderson reached for an egg, which was about the same size as Hewitt. "Dear doctor, please accept this token with our thanks and appreciation for your dedication," she said, looking to her husband. The good doctor was so overwhelmed and impressed by the generosity of the gift that, in a fit of excitement, he fell backwards, causing the door to shut with such force that it locked them up good and tight. But the key had been inadvertently left in the keyhole. They all listened downheartedly as the key fell to the ground with a clink. See? He tripped and fell and locked them in. What would become of them? Would they ever be found? "My roast is in the oven," cried Mrs. Anderson worriedly. Then Hewitt had an idea. Because he was so small, he managed to climb into the keyhole, maneuver through the weights and gears to turn the tumblers to the lock, and set them all free. Once again, it was up to Hewitt to save his parents, and now the good doctor too. And as always, Hewitt came through. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson watched Hewitt in all of his hidden talents. He was even more amazing than they had thought. Spontaneously, their voices rose in a beautiful aria, and feeling of overwhelming joy brimmed deep within their hearts for Hewitt. Even the good doctor felt compelled to join in. In that moment, the world in the Anderson household changed. Hewitt, standing in all of his splendor and glory, seemed tall compared to his former self. Now his parents understood. Hewitt did indeed know how to live amongst the giants. And because he was small, Hewitt was just as he should be, for his parents realized that big or small, either is best of all. Oh my gosh. Look, and the back has him sitting on top of a golden egg. So, friends, did you recognize that the parents really thought that he couldn't do a lot because he was small? And in the end of the story, they figured out that just because he was small didn't mean he couldn't do things. He could do a whole lot. He did more than they could because he was able to save them multiple times. See, that's why it's one of my favorite stories. Because we all share many, many, many gifts that we can use to help others around us, right? So, thank you for joining me for today's story, and I cannot wait to see you back here next time.